Hi, welcome to Papa's Workshop. Today is part 2 of my Jigsaw Basics, where we're making a project and I'm only using the jigsaw. And this is what we're making this little bookcase, and that is all we're doing is jigsaw and a couple pieces of sandpaper. So let's get started. Now for this project, I'm using 1/2" material. Now this is clear pine, but I know there's going to be a lot of questions out there as far as the type of wood. Anytime you're doing furniture, really it'd be nice to be able to find some hardwood, like walnut or cherry or even mahogany. But I don't have any of those places nearby. So what I did is went back to my old reliable, look in the scrap bin and see what I found. And I had a piece of 1/2" clear pine that I had used on another project. So that's what I'm going to use for this project. Now if you have the opportunity to be able to go to a store like Hobby Lobby, Michael's, any of those places, they also sell poplar that's in the 1/2". That would be very good as well. Now then, as far as the size, this piece of wood is 17 inches long and it is 9.5 inches wide. So that's what I'm going to use to be able to make this project. So keep that in mind when you're shopping for wood. That's the size that you're going to need. Anything bigger, that's okay too. Anything smaller, you're pretty much going to have to scale it down. Now I'm going to use this guide to be able to cut and rip the material. And I want to be able to rip this down to 1.25 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up right there. I'm going to tighten it. And then I want to double check that. Yeah, I can adjust that just a little. Okay. That's going to be my 1.25 inches. So I'll tighten that down. And I'm going to go ahead and rip this 2 pieces for this little bookshelf. To rip these 2 1.25" strips of wood, I like to be able to have my saw as close to the workbench as you can. And in this case, you see I got a little bit too close because I started cutting into the workbench. But that happens from time to time. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut this using that guide, and it makes for a very straight cut. The key to this is that you want to be able to look at the guide and make sure the guide is riding right against the wood itself. You do not want that to wander off because your thickness will change on your board. Okay, here's my 2 pieces that are 1.25 inches, and they actually turned out really good. The other thing that I want you to notice is there's really virtually no tear out on this solid wood at all. And that's using that downcut bit on the solid wood, and it does make a difference. Now the next thing we're going to do is lay out for the 2 ends, and I'm going to make this about 8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this at my 8-inch line, and I'm going to come up 1 inch, not using a square because we haven't talked about a square yet, but I can use a notebook. And I'm going to put that line right there, draw that in. I'm going to come up my 1 inch and draw that line in. Now the other thing that I want to do is make this bookcase where it's going to sit in here. So I think I'm going to use something just about like this. Okay. Then I'll mark my 1/2 inch, and I'm going to use the actual wood for this. There we go. Okay, and then in my other devices that I'm going to use for the arcs, I want to come in 1 inch on this side. Then we'll square that off. Right there. Then I'm going to use my little top to create my radius. There we go. So that's all done. And then on this, I'm going to create a line right through here. Then I want to use my trusty paint top. I'll create that radius. And I'm going to use my little smaller one and create this one. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, and then we'll use this pattern to create my second one. Okay, I no longer need my little guide on here, so I'm going to take that off. And it's important to tighten these thumb screws down tight, because all they will do is just rattle and fall out, and then you'll lose them. And that would not be a good thing. So there we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out now. Now, cutting this bottom section, I realized that the radius that I'm trying to cut was actually too small, and the blade was too wide to be able to make that cut. So what I had to do is just nibble at it a little bit and widen that space out to be able to cut it. And then afterwards, I'll come back and clean it up. Okay, at this point, I've got the basic shape cut out. What I'm going to do is grab some sandpaper, and I'm also going to work on this just a little bit more with this. And one of the things, this radius was a little bit too tight. So what I can do is just kind of nibble away at it this way. And that looks much better. Now granted, it would be nice to have a smaller width blade, but I didn't have one, so I just nibble away at it. Now then, as far as these cuts, I'm going to get the depth that I need first before I cut those out. Now I'm going to go ahead and sand this so that I can use this as a pattern to cut out my other side. Now so far we have not discussed sandpaper at all, and this is a good time to get a basic introduction into the sandpaper since I've got to use it on this project. First off, there's many different grits, and as the number increases, the finer the sandpaper. So you can get sandpaper 2,000, 3,000, and so on, which is very, very fine. Likewise, the lower the number, the coarser the paper is. So if I had to choose just 3, and that's all I could have in my shop, then I would start out with a 60 grit paper, and it has the number right here on it, and that's a fairly coarse grit paper. The next one that I would have would be the 150, and you can see the 150 there in the picture, and it's a much finer, but it's still reasonably coarse. And the final one that I would have would be the 220. The 220 is considered very fine, and for making furniture and woodworking projects, this is really the type of grit that's all you need to go to, is the 220. It'll give a very nice smooth finish on your projects. So that's what I'm going to use today. Now in another video later on, what I'm going to do is cover sandpaper in a much greater detail. And we're going to talk about the different grits and how you progressively work through them. But for this one, we're just going to stay with the 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with the 60 grit paper, and I'm going to start sanding and get the saw marks off of the wood. And I'm also going to take and round over this edge just a little bit. Now, one of the things you can do is just take a little scrap piece of wood and you make a sanding block, and that will help keep it nice and straight too when you're sanding. So that's another thing that you can do. And that helps to keep the edges nice and square, and it'll be able to remove an even amount of material. Okay, now that the teeth mark have been removed, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the 150 paper, and I'm going to continue sanding. And I'm going to go ahead and use my sanding block for this. Okay, that's looking real good. We'll move to this next one. Then I'm going to go to the final grit for the 220. And I want to wipe that down real quick. And I'm going to start out without the block. Now I want to start on my end, and the first thing that I want to do is work on this radius. And to do that, I can actually use a dowel rod the same way as we used the block before. And I'm just going to put the paper around my dowel rod, and then I'll be able to use it like this and sand right into that spot. And that's coming out really good fast. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but that cleaned up really nice. Now I've been sanding this for a few minutes, and I got just a little bit more to be able to sand, because you can see where that tooth of the saw got into there. But you can see that it doesn't take long to be able to do that. I'm going to put this back on here and go a little bit more. Now it's almost totally gone now. And that 60 grit does real well to get all the teeth marks off of it, and it cleans it up nice. The 150 really begins to dress up the project and starts to make it look good. Now you can see that I'm not quite to the line, but I have a nice smooth radius, and I think I'm going to leave that just like it is. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up now with the 220. Now this will make a nice pattern to be able to cut out the next section. The only thing that's left, I've got to be able to cut in the notches. This line right here is just kind of an arbitrary line. That's nothing that's been measured yet. So I'm going to go ahead and measure it, make the pattern, and then we'll cut this out next. Now here's my last piece of wood, and I'm just going to go ahead and lay that down. Get the edge smooth on the back. Make sure that it's even on this end. And that creates my next piece, my other side. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out off camera. I'm going to sand it and bring it up to the same point as this one. And then we're going to go ahead and measure and cut these slots. Okay, for the most part, my sanding is done now. And what I want to be able to do is go ahead and set up for the depth of these notches and be able to get these cut. Now what's going to happen is there's going to be a notch over here as well, and this will slide down into this and lock in place. Now what I'm going to do is measure over 1 inch from each end and put my mark. And then I'm going to use the wood itself to be able to do the other mark. because I want this snug. Again, not using the square because we haven't talked about a square. And I said the only tool we were using is the jigsaw. I'm going to go back to my notebook and use that as my square. And there we go. Now I'm going to cut this halfway through. And remember, this is 1 1/4 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and divide this in half. And what I can do, the simplest way, is just go from my 2-inch mark to my 4-inch mark and then mark the center, which is 3, and that will give me my halfway point. So that is the notch that I'm going to be able to cut out. So there we go. So I've got this notch laid out. I'll do the same thing to the other side as well as to the other piece, and we'll be able to cut them out. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut this first one out now. And that actually slides in really well. Now keep in mind, yes, this is going to be sliding in over here, but it's the same thickness. That fits real good. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other ones. Okay, I've now got all of these cut out, and you can see how these mesh together. And that's what I want to be able to do on the end panels now. So we're going to go ahead and measure and get these cut now, and I'll cut one out, and then I'll use this as a pattern for the other one. Now the depth of cut for this is actually the half the distance of my 1 1/4 inches, and that's measured off of the bottom. Once that's done, then I can go ahead and cut it out. Now it's time to do a quick test fit to see how it will mesh together. And it is perfect. That's awesome. Okay, now that that's cut out, I'm just going to use this as a template and mark the other piece. So I'm going to line this up so it's perfectly even. And then I'll just go ahead and mark that. And we'll cut that out with the jigsaw. Okay, now we've got just the project finished and a little bit of final sanding. And it's time to see if we can put this together and what it's going to look like. So the back pieces goes right in place. This one's a little bit tight, but it has to be straight, and that's the important thing. And when I get it, it slides right in, and you really can't ask for anything better than that. Now to put the front piece in, slides right in place, just a little snug, perfect, can't beat it, I love it. I think this project turned out great. Let me know what you think of this project down in the comments, and for the next tool, I'm going to introduce the drill to you, and we're going to be able to do a project using the jigsaw and a drill. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe so you won't miss out, and hit that little bell. Hi everyone, thank you for watching my video today. If you like the video, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below and the little bell next to it so you'll be notified on the different videos that I upload. Also check out the videos over here to be able to stay up to date on the happenings in my shop. So again, thank you for watching my videos.